What made the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda a genocide according to the UN Genocide Convention?
Right. The genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda had already fulfilled the conditions of becoming a genocide because, as you know, in the stages of planning a genocide, there are aspects that you need to consider. A group that is targeted and a group that is looked at as the enemy of the country, a group that was supposed to be wiped out. And from the ruling of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, it was agreed that the atrocities that were committed against the Tutsi group were of a genocide. And from that moment, the process went on at the UN until it was confirmed that it's a genocide. First of all, they agreed it's a genocide. And later on, in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, it was again proved that it's a genocide against Tutsi, to be specific, because in a genocide, there needs to be a specific group of minority mainly that is being targeted by the government and all those who are involved in the atrocities.
Why do you think the genocide happened and how was it possible?
The genocide against the Tutsi was a plan for more than 30 years because it's rooted from the bad legacy that we got from the colonial masters, where the national identity was lost and the leadership continued the racial identity, which led them to planning sporadic killings and identifying the Tutsi as an enemy of the country, even killing them through the years, but also chasing them to be refugees or to become refugees in the neighboring countries until they got to the final solution, which was the genocide against the Tutsi. So the genocide against the Tutsi happened because it was a long way planned by the leadership. Number two, it happened because the young people, the population was trained, was educated, was brainwashed that it is the truth that the Tutsi are the enemies of Rwanda. The national identity was already lost, and convinced that the Tutsi are enemies in the whole process of identifying them, dehumanizing them. The ultimate stage was to eliminate all of them. And the genocide was possible because of that wrong process of preparing the atrocities of 1994.
And you mentioned dehumanization and seeing a certain group as enemies. Could you develop a little bit on that? What kind of conception of the human did you see? How was that visible in practice, in actions? What really happened?
Human beings are the same everywhere. However, when a group is targeted for killings such as the killings of genocide, that group started being considered to be like animals. What happened in Rwanda, for example, the Tutsi were called to be snakes, to be cockroaches. Violence was going on through the years, and mainly in the 90s, 1990 to 1994, the Tutsi were being arrested, they were being tortured, they were being killed, and no one could bring those perpetrators to justice, or there was no accountability at all. Even some of the perpetrators of those crimes were being awarded because they've done a nice action to the enemy of the country, to the cockroaches, to the snakes. The hate radio were saying that, please make sure that you scratch the snake before it bites you. And others were saying, you know, the cockroaches are very bad insects. Please scratch them before they escape. So that's already to show you how they were dehumanizing them, to the small insect of a cockroach, to the snake, which has a really bad image among human beings. So they were people who wouldn't get any consideration in the community, but only who are candidates to torture, to imprisonment, and in the end to death.
And with this background and with this happening, after these years of accountability, how is the relationship today between the Hutu and the Tutsis, and what is today the basis of national identity,
Sure.
30 years after?
30 years after the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, Rwanda is a very resilient nation that has achieved a lot in terms of unity and reconciliation, where the national identity was restored. In Rwanda, before 1994, our identity cards were indicating if we are Tutsi or Hutu or Batwa. Straight after the genocide, this was removed to create a new national document which indicates that we are all Rwandans. There are several policies that were put together to sustain this process of unity and reconciliation among Rwandans. It's not just one thing that could push the unity, but it's a combination of efforts and policies that brought Rwandans progressively together. And now Rwandans live in Rwanda, not calling themselves Tutsi or Hutu anymore. They live as Rwandans. They identify themselves as Rwandans. Of course, the background is still there because we still have generations of people who went through the intoxication and the brainwashing of the genocide. However, if you may know it or not, Rwanda is a country that is made by more than 60% of young people who are under 35. So, which means that the biggest percentage of them was born after the genocide. They grew up in the consequences of the genocide, and they can see how dangerous this was, seeing the consequences they grew up with. The reason why Rwanda has achieved of being one nation, of living together, whether in your background you're a Hutu or a Tutsi, you don't gain anything because that's your background. Or he or someone else doesn't get a job or doesn't get any other opportunity because he was a Tutsi or because he was a Hutu. No, Rwandans get a chance to, equal chances to everything, whether in politics, whether in the civil society, and different other opportunities that are available in the country. And Rwanda is developing the social tissue that was destroyed through the process of a cohesive manner, and Rwandans live together now.
It's good to hear. And what role, just briefly, do you think that the accountability process with different tribunals, you had different levels of tribunals, just briefly about those tribunals, and what do you think in retrospect has been the impact of that for the reconciliation?
Right, yeah. The accountability process contributed a lot. Of course, there was the ICTR that was working hard to indict the criminals, those who were the planners of the genocide, the top leaders, the masterminders like Theoneste Bagosora, the Prime Minister Kambanda, the case of Akayes that is famous, and others. However, in Rwanda, after the genocide, we developed what was called the homegrown solutions, finding solutions to the problems that we have within the country using our culture, using what we have inside. And this is when the government of Rwanda thought of the traditional courts Gacaca that brought together the members of the community, survivors of the genocide, other citizens who are in the community because we had so many refugees coming back after the genocide, and the perpetrators. And the process was not aiming to sentencing or punishing the criminals only, but it was also to bring them back into the community to tell the truth, to show where they have thrown the bodies of the victims, but also to start really bringing light to what happened in 1994 as they get reintegrated into the community. So that was the best way that Rwanda could deal with the problems, could deal with the justice, because many of the judges, some of them were involved in the genocide, others were killed, and the justice sector was striving to find staff, to find judges, to find prosecutors. But the community-based courts were a solution because it was a way of also of the accountability process that contributed, as I said, because it's a number of policies together to the unity among Rwandans, to seeing villages of perpetrators now living with survivors, to hand in hand working to develop the country and move forward together.
So what was the gender aspect of the genocide, you would say?
Right. The gender aspect of the genocide in Rwanda is one aspect where you see the most powerful atrocities being committed, because rape was used as a weapon of genocide in Rwanda. So women, girls were being raped, not only to torture them, but also to kill them progressively, or even some of them be impregnated with children of perpetrators. We have cases of those who were raped and infected to HIV, and of course the perpetrators knew that this is what they are doing. There are those who, of course, were raped and they couldn't anymore work, for example. They lost their physical abilities, they lost their mental abilities, and they died along the process. But not only that, because we also needed to mention that when we talk about the gender, the case was not only focusing on women, but also men, young boys who were being raped by women perpetrators. And mothers who were killing their own children because they were previously married to Tutsi husbands, and they didn't want the Tutsi blood to be in their line of blood, and they could kill their own children. Fathers who could also do the same thing to their own children. So the gender aspect during the genocide against the Tutsi is an aspect that had the most horrible experiences of the atrocities during a genocide. We even know it that in the process of accountability in the ICTR, with this process of Akayezu, where rape was internationally approved, that this is a tool of genocide, is a crime of genocide, from the cases that were processed in Arusha, and now at least from that base we know it's being addressed in international law. But it's not only that, because we also have other cases like Valeria Vemeriki, and we have Nyiramasuhuko Pauline, who and his son, who did commit the most unbelievable atrocities in regards with the gender, with rape and so on. So meaning that, yeah, during the genocide against the Tutsi, many of the victims witnessed the horrible experiences towards gender, but also there are some brave people, women, who were hiding, neighbors and friends. So you talk about it, there are the victims in one aspect, there are the perpetrators in another aspect, but also there are rescuers. So which gives you an overview or a chance to explore gender in one angle or the other during a genocide, not only the genocide against the Tutsi, and in any other conflicts or other atrocities being committed, because sexual violence or other violence committed, at times gender plays a role also into somehow refraining to continue the crimes that are being committed, as the case of the rescuers in Rwanda. Yeah.
And your personal history about your hiding or your rescuers during the genocide also says something about exactly this. Could you just briefly tell us what happened?
Yeah, for sure. While I was being hidden by a friend, who was a friend to my family in 1994, the woman in that family was really, really strong and working hard to make sure that we survive, myself and my cousin, because she was not oriented to any hate of the Tutsi. Her husband too, but the care that she was giving us, how she was supportive to us, how she was making sure that she has all the news about the killings going on around, and making sure that no one comes to search her house, because they were searching the house also to find if there are Tutsi hiding inside, was something that is unique to see a mother of a family doing that. Yes, that the bravery of mothers in Africa, that the bravery of mothers that we had in the 90s in Rwanda. But yeah, of course, her efforts and the efforts of many others. There are, for example, in Rwanda, we have nuns who became killers and they were sentenced in Brussels. But we also have nuns who were hiding Tutsi and died because they were hiding them. So this is to show you that it's not only about me or about my personal experience, but it's about the experience that was going on around the country to show you that even if the majority was being involved in those atrocities, there are some others, independently from the agenda, were doing the right things that they had to do.
Because she was a Hutu, the mother in this case, she was a
Yes,
Hutu.
she was.
She was a Hutu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what do we take from that? We take from that something about personal responsibility, personal judgment in resisting group hostility?
Well, yeah, I think it's personal responsibility, but also critical thinking.
Yeah.
And then a sense of nationalism, belonging to a country. Rwanda had several thousands, hundreds of thousands of refugees who spent 30 years with no country, no identity, no permanent resident, somehow recognized by the UN, and again not recognized by the UN, the UNHCR. So spending all those years away, knowing that you have a country, you have a culture, you have a language, and you can't really live in that, was one of the saddest realities of the process of planning the genocide, because Rwandans were chased to flee the country. And looking at it and looking at the fact that there are very few people who had that sort of critical thinking brings you to a sense of belonging, of having a nation, of having people who can make a difference. Where others do not care, where others actually are involved in committing a genocide. So yeah, as I said, it's a sense of personal responsibility, it's having critical thinking, it's a sense of nationalism, and overall I think it's a sense of being a true human being, because we are not born bad. We are not born criminals. We are not born perpetrators. There is a process through the continuum of violence that we go through to become perpetrators. And there is no one who is born like that. And I believe that that woman, that mother who was hiding us, did have the original sense of humanity that we are all born with.
Thank you.
You're welcome.